folks. Those of you who are here, which doesn't look like anyone yet, which is fine. So we're just going to fill up the beer tube while we let people join the show. How are you, Rob?
Good. This is totally tanked, and this lovely beer tube comes courtesy of our special guest today.
Yes, Clayton at Workbench Hobbies. We're going to hear from him.
I'm just watching John do it. This is the first time I've seen it in action. It's got a nice thick head on it.
It's a heady boy. Going to be a heady boy. Yeah, there we go. Lean it over a bit more.
This is so for those who don't know, a beer tube is a tube you fill full of beer and then you drink the beer. Clayton from what was the Desktop Hobbies?
Workbench Hobbies.
Workbench Hobbies having had one of these with us up in Cairns at the Oz Armour Fest, said, "Boys, you need one of these for the podcast," and so he's gone out and got us one and sent it through, and we're very thankful. We'll be chatting with Clayton later on during the podcast.
Yep. So for folks who are joining us now, we're just filling up the beer tube before we start the show properly, and I promise my face will eventually appear. There we go.
Yes. Try not to move too much, John, otherwise we will get beer.
Picky.
I know. But there is a lot of expensive electronic stuff of yours we don't want to be pouring beer on.
No.
This beer is not our reviewing beer for today. This beer is drinking beer.
Alright, so we've got Silicon Slick 69, Kilo 19, Alan's joined us, Tasman's joined us, Cornelius is somewhere around here. Evan's joined us from Texas. G'day, Evan. Do feel free.
We have two more beers to fit in that, but with that head, I'm not sure they're going to go in there.
Done with that, so we need the magic wand.
This will keep the beers cold.
Yeah. There it goes.
Bingo bango, and then
the lid goes on top.
And you'll get to see, hopefully, that lovely frothy head will disappear.
Yeah, so folks, you'll be able to see the beer level go down as we go. All right, let's start this podcast, Rob.
That was just a little opening intro. Anyway, so for today, John, we've got...
Hang on, we need to do an intro like, hello, folks.
Hello, folks. I'm Rob, he's John.
Hello!
We're totally tanked. And the tankiest podcast in Tankville. We have a new studio here that John has forked out lots and lots of money for.
Well, I just bought a house and it happened to have a dungeon. The neighbours are all very excited about the what's down here in the basement, but whatever else it may get used for, it's actually a pretty great little podcast studio.
So we'll see how this goes. We're hopefully not going to get... die off from any fumes. We've got the Dyson air extractor going to keep us nice and cool.
That was a housewarming gift from our Japan bureau.
Lovely.
Yes. All right, so it's all coming together, the show. Now, what tank are we talking about, Rob? Let's get into that.
Talking about the one you see on your screens is the Char 1 Bis.
B.
Sorry, Char 1 B1 Bis.
Yeah, I honestly thought when I was researching this that it was more like, bison was something they were aiming at there, but it turned out it's just French writing B.
Yep.
And it's pronounced B like a killer bee.
Yep. So it's Char de Bataille, battled or also known as a battle tank B1, and the Bis stands for repeated. So basically, the B1 came out first, and then they said, yeah, you know what, we need to up armor this thing.
It's a little bit like 2.0 in modern tech usage.
Yeah, so they threw on the Bis, and that means they've done it again, but a little bit better. So look, we are also going to talk about the other two derivatives of this tank, either precursors or follow-ons, which is we're going to give them, because I don't think they're going to see them get their own podcast. So we're going to talk about the Char 2C, the super heavy tank of the 1920s, and the ARL 44, the tank designed while France was occupied by the Germans, and they wanted to bring it out as their successor to the Char B1, but it entered service too late for the war and didn't last very long. So we're going to talk about, but the main one we're going to talk focusing on is the Char B1 Bis, which was the Char B1 Bis, also known as the duck tank. So for those who haven't seen it, there's plenty of comparisons to this tank to looking like a duck.
Really?
Yeah, supposedly.
I see more sort of a baguette caterpillar kind of thing going on.
Well,
But,
there's
yes.
anyway. So a few little bits and pieces about the B1 Bis. It was designed from 1921 to 1934, so it took a long time. They were looking at what they were doing. It was produced from 1935 to 1937 for the B1, and then from 1937 to 1940 for the B1 Bis.
Now they did.
You'll never guess what you.
They did upgrade the existing B1s to the B
Yes.
variant. So
Yes.
by the time you get to May 1940, pretty much every B1 was supposed to be a B variant. And also you had, but you did also have the problem that they had different factories making them and sending them out with different parts, and different turrets would arrive, and it all gets, it's a modeller's delight. You can make pretty much any version you want.
You'll never guess what month they stopped production in, John.
Was it May 1940?
No, that was June 1940.
June 1940.
They were still rolling them off the production line as the Nazis were coming across the border. 405 around that were built. It was 28 tons, which was very heavy for the time. 21 feet long, 8 foot wide, 9 foot high, so very high.
Yep. And the length is one of those things that they envisaged it, particularly because the design started so far back in the 1920s, where the purpose of a tank was still very much trench crossing. So they were like, we want a long tank so it can cross the biggest, widest trenches. And it wasn't well known at the time, but what's been figured out since is that there's just a certain geometry between track length and tank width. And that's why pretty much all the world's tanks follow that geometry now, because if you don't, then it gets very hard to turn corners.
Yes, and there was a lot of difficulties driving this tank as well. So, for crew, it had, and for those who can see on the screen, it's got the hull gun, the Hull 75. It's also got the 47mm in the turret, along with so we've got a 75mm gun designed in the hull that was designed to take out bunkers during trench warfare, and the 47mm gun in the turret was the anti-armor gun for the tank. It also had two 7.5mm MGs. One was a coax in the turret, and the other was a fixed gun in the hull. So it wasn't even a ball gun, like a ball mounting. It was basically fixed forward machine gun. Now,
but they did invent a very innovative transmission system to allow the tank to be steered instead of just putting a pivot on the gun.
Yep.
And that required a totally different set of lubricants. Well done, France. Genius.
We'll come to those. Okay, so first off, just like our Sommoir, we have 4 people in the tank. One is the driver, who is also the gunner for the hull-mounted 75mm gun and the hull-mounted machine gun. We have the loader for the 75mm gun in the hull. We have who is also the he's also the mechanic, and he also hands rounds to the commander. And the commander is the gunner, loader, commander for the 47mm gun in the turret. Oh, and the coax MG in the turret. And then you've got the radio operator, who operates the radio.
I think the radio operator also had a bit of a role of handing ammunition up to the commander as well.
I saw that in 2 different spots, whether it was the loader, the gunner, the loader for the 75 and the radio operator. So maybe they both handed the commander, here's another round for you, saying, what the hell am I going to do with another round? I'm already being the gunner for the machine gun, the commander and everything else.
Yeah.
And it was, once again, the French one-person turret concept overloads the commander in their role, but they've also taken a step further by overloading the driver and making them the gunner for the hull-mounted gun. So
yeah, well, when you can only aim by steering, that pretty much falls to the driver, doesn't it? Which just comes down to, on paper, from what we now know about what constitutes good tank design, this is a terrible tank. It gets more complicated as a story because... sorry, Rob's. It's okay. He's mastered it. There we go. It gets more complicated as a story because the combat record of this tank is actually surprisingly good, even though so many things look like a really bad idea on paper. So the story gets complicated. I would also note the radio operator was dealing with a radio that was good for voice communications out to at maximum 2 kilometres, so around a mile, and beyond that was dealing with Morse code.
Yes, so...
And the idea of being in a clanking... the suspension on this thing is terrible. You'll see in the pictures, the road wheels are tiny, which isn't the sole determinant of ride quality, but it's one of them. So he's in there trying to decode Morse code and tap out Morse code while he's in a vehicle that's lurching around across
so
the countryside.
The voice comms were good for within the platoon and or company. If you wanted any further information from the higher command of your tank regiment, you would be on the Morse code, and that would basically it did not help the communications, but unlike most of the other French tanks, they did all come with radios, whereas the Sommars were fitted for but not with.
So it did actually have the radios, which is important. Now, what unit were they originally attached to?
Oh, that's up to you, John.
Okay. It's a strange beast to our Western way of thinking. These were armoured divisions in the infantry.
Yes, okay. So it was just a infantry support tank.
Yeah, but it was infantry support at divisional groupings of the tanks.
Yes.
It's a funny thing because, if your history of World War II is watching Laurence Olivier's World of War, which is an excellent place to start your World War II learning, they really push the idea of, the French didn't concentrate their tanks. And when you actually get down in what happened, the Battle of Hanut we talked about with the S-35, the French actually concentrated their armour just fine. They did a lot of other things stupidly wrong and badly. Okay. What?
So it's got a 270 horsepower engine. It could do 28 kilometres on road.
That's terrifying of the size of this thing. That must have been quite a sight.
21 kilometres off road. It had a 200 kilometre range. That dropped down when they went to the Bis because they added the extra armour and basically couldn't operate for as long. Had a door into the engine bay from within the tank, so you could actually carry out running repairs on your engine in battle by the loader for the 75 going back and whacking something with a spanner. So,
they literally had a corridor down the interior of the tank that you could, in theory, fit down, and there's a hatch on the back that can only be opened by someone who's gone down that corridor to open the hatch. A lot of shouting would have been involved in operating this tank.
So there were for the driver, between the driver and the the driver and the commander, there were a set of light buttons to tell them what to do. They could also have some a speaking tube. But what didn't have that a lot of the Sommars had was where the commander used to be able to just tap the driver on the shoulder with their feet, because they were sitting right behind them. They didn't have that sort of accessibility. So again, it really changed the dynamics and the ability to communicate within the tank between the driver and commander, who basically were both the gunners, to say, yes, I'm turn left or right and fire your gun or anything like that. So
it really is not a tank design you would do today.
No.
There's a lot of ideas, and some of them are like, that's not the worst idea ever, but the practicality of it.
So the 75 in the hull, unlike the M3 League, M3 Grant, which could turn left and right, was fixed facing forwards, but could elevate and depress. It was the only additions to it, so it could only fire directly forwards, but so that's why the driver had to slew the tank left and right to be able to aim that gun. They had decent optics and vision slits for the driver and the commander. However, once again, the commander did not have their own cupola. They didn't have an openable cupola that they could stick their heads out. They had to.
Although they did have a hatch at the back of the turret that they could sit on.
Same as the Sommoir, which was the hatch at the back of the turret was ostensibly to allow them to take the 47mm gun in and out of the tank, so do any sort of replacements or repairs for that, but also meant that the commander could sit on the back of the turret and look around, but wasn't very comfortable or useful, and left them in a very exposed position, or otherwise they had to be buttoned up to be able to do anything, at which point the
Panzer III did have a side hatch in the turret as well. I know because sat in one when I had a ride around in it. Sorry,
Panzer
Panzer
IV.
IV. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
That's for loading rounds in and out, but
Sure, but it was still a hatch that you could fit. I mean, I'm not small. You could, I can fit in and out of that one.
whereas the B1 had a door in the right hand side of the hull. That was the egress and ingress for the tank. So you had you didn't have any hatches for the crew on top of the hull of the tank. Everybody had to go in and out of that side door, and the commander could go out through his turret.
Yeah, and it's not actually that bad an idea. I mean, the French put a lot of effort into building these armoured doors and the hinges that could traverse these enormously heavy armoured doors. But in terms of exiting a tank under fire, the fact that the door swung open forward and then the crew could exit through the hatch with the protection of the door, that's not nothing. But it's generally a bad idea having a door in the
And
side
also
of the tank.
only one exit out. Whereas
It's a biggish door. Once you've got it open, you probably get everyone out of that pretty quickly. But,
hopefully the first guy out does not get shot and stuck there.
yeah, you just pick up his legs and throw him out.
Speaking of, other things for the tank. Ooh, what else we got? No, we've got the armour on the tank. So it had started off with 40 mils of armour on the front hull, and that was for the B1. And then when they went to the B1 Bis, they up armoured that to 60 mils because they found that they wanted to be able to. They were basing all their armour statistics and ideas off what the French anti-tank guns could withstand, and so they said, right, the 40 mils doesn't cut it anymore, and when they up-armoured it, put another 20 mils of armour on the front hull, the engine could still push the tank around well enough, so they said, right, we're just going to put up-armour it, and away we go.
Now, this is obviously, if you look at the pictures, a largely riveted tank. I gather quite a lot of it was actually bolted together as well, which... the spalling hazard of nuts and bolts is something that doesn't bear thinking about. But you have to say, again, when you go to the combat record, it was a tough tank in 1940.
Oh, yes. And so for the tanks it was facing from the Panzer 1s, 2s, 3s and 4s, its armour could withstand all of those, and its gun could penetrate and destroy any of those tanks. Now, the other tanks that were coming out at that stage of the war in 1940, the KVs, the T-34s, yes, their gun wouldn't withstand them, and its armour wouldn't withstand some of the bigger guns, but the Germans weren't fielding those, and neither were the Italians with the M39, 1339 or 1440s. And they were the two likely tank targets for the tank. But let's talk about the very special things that the French came up with for the tank. The Nader Traverse System. Now, this was a very special thing. This is what allowed the driver... So, as you can see from the turrets of the tank, the tracks of the tank, it goes all the way around the hull. And
which was a very fine tank design in the
1916.
Yeah,
but
and also the track is a really, we touched on this with the Sommoir, but the French industry couldn't make what was modern tank tracks by the late 1930s, and they were still producing these horrible heavy corrugated tracks that literally look like they came off a Holt tractor from 1905. So yeah, the French industry was definitely having some problems. Other things worked.
But, so they came up with this very special, clever idea of having called the Nader Traverse System. So the driver's sitting there, they don't have levers, they had a steering wheel, so they could drive the tank, and they could, what the Nader Traverse System would do, it would suck heated castor oil in or out of the engine, which would allow which would then slew the tank very accurately left or right, and allowing the driver to, if they're actually driving, to turn left or right, or if they're in a stationary position, to traverse the 75mm gun left and right and get it onto target.
Now, while we're talking about that, it couldn't just take any castor oil, though.
No, it had to be special automotive oil.
Yeah, and this was a problem because the tank crews were not...
there was nothing in the documentation for the tank crews to say, don't use normal pharmaceutical castor oil, you need automotive castor oil which is totally different. And
Particularly, pharmaceutical castor oil stops functioning as a lubricant once it gets over 80 degrees.
And
Which in an engine is something that's going to happen.
surprisingly enough, when they did do this, because they didn't know any better, the tank itself would become immobilized and basically become a pillbox. So there you go, with the gun facing the one direction it's pointing.
Now, there is also a suggestion, though, that the French carried on about the unreliability of the NATO system purely to misdirect people so that they wouldn't copy it, because it actually worked quite well.
Yes, it was a good system, but it was very expensive, complex, and they spread the rumor that it was prone to breakdowns and so forth. But it wasn't prone to breakdowns; it was just prone to becoming unusable because they didn't do it the right way.
But it also, I mean, just from a supply point of view, and also this tank required a special petrol. Because there was a lot of aviation parts in the engine, which led to the situation where German panzer divisions invading France were literally filling up at petrol stations, but the French tanks couldn't fill up at their own petrol stations because or gas stations to our American audience, because they had to wait for the proper supply truck with the proper orphan fuel type, along with the orphan lubricant types. Which is all really dumb.
Yep. So the NATO system was an extra 400, like half a ton of 450 kilos of parts. It wasn't the only. The experienced crews would know the difference between the automotive castor oil and the pharmaceutical castor oil, but as these tanks were being delivered to tank regiments days before combat started, there was not a lot of time for new crews to find out this sort of information. And as I said, there was nothing in the documentation. Now, what John was talking about with the aviation fuel, so they did need a high octane aviation fuel, 85 something or others, 85 octane, which was not accessible outside the logistics train for the tanks. Meant many of them ran out of fuel and were forced to scuttle and abandon their tanks. They did have an inbuilt logistics train of armoured fuel carriers, but of course, once they're gone, which makes a nice target.
It's an obvious high priority target, isn't it?
Yeah, and they can't be everywhere at once. Once they were gone, then these tanks couldn't be refueled and made to keep going. Other parts of the tank also needed lots of other different oils and lubricants, and so there was nothing standard about it. You need a lot of support for it. They did have a lot of support for it. So while it had a crew of 4 people in the tank, each tank actually had a crew of about 6 or 7 people, and the others would follow along behind and form part of the maintenance and support for the tanks, which is something the French are carrying on doing with the way they set up their tank companies. Is that there might be 3 people within the tank, but the actual crew will be 4 people, and so that the others will be following along behind in another armoured vehicle in order to provide support to the tanks.
Yeah, I mean, it's how many people should be in the tank is a vexed question that will be with us as long as there are tanks, I think.
Well, I mean, the French are taking the point of view is that this way they've always got people trained in it and replacements available for the tanks. So if you've got a crew of 3 and one of those goes down, you can't operate the tank. Whereas they have a crew of 4, 3 of which might be in the tank, and that 4th person, if anybody within a tank platoon goes down, then that 4th person can jump into any other of the tanks within the platoon and keep their effectiveness going.
Yeah, so, which compared to the American system, which I know about, it's a pity I don't know about the Australian one, but literally if an M1 Abrams has a crew member unable to get in the tank, they just go out with 3 people in the tank. And I think it's tank crews, I do get that tank crews really need to have a synergy. At the same time, you'd like to think that a well-trained person would be more useful than no one. Yeah. Anywho.
All right. As we were talking about before, the tracks and the hull were designed to cross trenches from World War I, so they could cross gaps up to 2.75 metres wide. Here we go.
At the expense of a suboptimal track geometry.
Yes. Yeah. Production, as I was saying before, production continued right up till June 1940, with the surrender in the middle of the month, 16th I think it was, with 27 tanks rolling off the line that month, which was May of 1940 was their highest production month, with 45 or 47 coming off.
And considering World War II had started in 1939, admittedly late-ish 39.
And then you had the phony war with...
but the phony war was a good chance to get your armour together.
France had the biggest armoured force besides Russia at that stage.
Yeah, I just feel like the fact that they only hit peak production in May of 1940 as the entire country was burning suggests they had been insufficiently serious before that.
And the French had this, again, they had the idea of, we're going to, in order to not have our secrets exposed, we're going to keep the information so tightly controlled that we're not even going to tell our tank crews, who we are busily training up, what's going on. So again, they just really hurt themselves because they wouldn't. They were so controlling of the information that the tank crews didn't know what was happening, how to operate these machines, and they would get them so late in the day for combat operations that they didn't know how to go about them. So they had been training in the Renault FTs and the R35s.
Which the Renault FT and the R45 or 35?
35.
35, okay. Renault FT was a great tank in 1918. World-beating, world-leading.
But it was a two-person light tank.
Yeah.
And whereas this is a huge tank.
It's not giving you more than tank familiarisation, which is a thing you need in training, but it's just like a lot of British Commonwealth forces used Bren gun carriers for familiarisation training.
And formation and so forth. But there's no commonality between the systems, and so you had different guns, different machinery, different driving and steering, everything else, and so there was no ability to you needed 6 months of proper training to get from driving a Renault FT to being able to drive a Char B1. But they gave them.
They've got tracks. That's about what they've got in common.
They gave them a couple of days and said, "Yep, off you go, boys."
Yeah, national mobilisation is one of the most fiendishly complex human endeavours ever undertaken, and your sequencing in any complex project is super important. And this is a case where they really should have been prioritising getting the tanks out to the people who are going to have to use them a lot earlier than hitting peak production, when the Germans' late spring offensive, very late spring when you think about it, actually started. So, amongst the many, many, many failings of the French government in the start of World War II,
there were many.
This was a big one, particularly because for all its flaws and quirks, it was in 1940 an incredibly formidable vehicle when it got in contact with the enemy, as we're going to discuss. Yeah.
So, I mean, the thinking behind it was with the 75mm gun and the 47mm anti-tank gun, you could carry out you had the effectiveness of what the Panzer IIIs and Panzer IVs were doing with their anti-tank and anti-strong point HE rounds were doing within the one thing, and it was invulnerable to their guns. So it was capable. But realistically, so on paper, its effectiveness was huge against those tanks, but in actuality, the 1B1 was usually quite ineffective against the capabilities and the organisation of the Panzer IIIs and Panzer IVs.
Sorry, I'm just going to go deal with that dog.
While John's doing that, I'm going to take this opportunity to put some more beer
Come on. Get out.
in our beer tube, so that they don't get. One of the issues. Whoop. Okay, John. Oh, hang on. How we do this? Our cooling thing needs to go in. So this is an operation you may. We'll see how we go.
All right.
There's one person.
Good old side paw. All right. Sorry about that, everyone. It's coming. It's going well. Welcome to the YouTube channel where you watch people pour beer into a tube so they can pour beer into a glass.
It's one of those things that happens.
That you can watch
Us
the beer
talk about.
Although we are getting the can rips back in, which was something I was worried we would lose with the beer tubes. So there we go.
As I'm pouring towards myself.
So this thing holds, and thank you to Clayton from Workbench Hobbies for providing it. Holds about a six pack, and
depending how well you pour it.
Yeah. For those who are wondering, the beer we're drinking here is First Tracks Brewing Company fresh. Yeah, what's it called? Fresh Tracks Pristine Lager.
This is not our beer review beer, though.
Brewed in the southern tablelands of New South Wales. It's very cheap at the moment in Australia and quite good, and the local beer delivery company delivers it. So here we go.
There you go.
Yeah. Just a dude turns up over the fence and demands to see my ID, and there we go. Okay, getting back to the podcast, Rob.
All right. Okay, so the obligatory Girls and Panzer reference.
Okay, good.
Yes, so the statement is, the B1 looks like a mallard, right? Better than a Type 89, I guess. So that's one of the references to being a bit of a duck tank, is the with the beak sticking out the front of the turret assembly and the 47mm gun sticking out the front. So something along those lines.
Now, let's talk a little bit about the production history, because again, it's an interesting thing where the French had some interesting ideas and they were bad, but they were interesting.
They were interesting.
So you had a guy called Estienne who was a very big deal in the French military, and he'd seen the way the French companies fought over who got tank contracts in World War One, and he said, we're not going to do that. I'm going to ask you all to design your perfect tank, and then I will choose the bits of the tank that I want in this, and no one gets to have any patents, but if you participate in the project, then you'll get tank production contracts. You'll be, you build 50 of them and you build 60 of them, and penny packeting it out to manage the relationships. And what this sort of comes down to is this French idea that this is the best solution for the situation we're in right now, but it's not going to be very good when the situation changes. And the one thing you can rely on in this world is that things will change.
Really?
Yes. Yeah. And so that was a big part of what ended up going wrong with this program, which they spent an enormous amount of money on. And while this tank definitely did prove itself quite adept in combat, you could argue that they could have got better bang for the buck out of it. The other thing is that the development process of this vehicle was very much that it started as purely an assault gun. With a untraversable 75mm cannon in a
which is perfect for World War One.
Yeah, but
as the point
in a tracked vehicle that could rumble up and slowly traverse with its fancy transmission, and blow up strong points with a 75mm gun, and that was what they wanted this to do. And then over its very long development history, starting in the 1920s till really 1940, they came up with what was the final version. With the B. So and it's like, oh, let's chuck a turret on it. Oh, we'll put machine guns in the turret. Oh, we'll put an anti-tank gun in the turret. And it kept the goalposts kept moving, and yet they were stuck with what made sense for a vehicle in the early 1920s, and that would come down to a lot of the flaws in this vehicle. We talked about this with the Arjun, that just when your development history gets too long on a vehicle, you've got too many design decisions that were made too far ago in the past.
Yeah, so they started off with 4 companies that were going to make this tank, and of course the provision of certain parts like the NADA traverse system and the cast turret were only made by one of those companies, and so it will become,
I think.
which will become a focal point a choke point of production, saying, well, we can't build enough NADA traverse systems, therefore, while we might be building 100 hulls, we can't actually roll them off the production line because we're only getting 25 traverse systems available to install. So there was big issues with that, and so they started out with the 4 companies, and they brought in and they created AMX, which was the nationalised part of Renault to carry out army production, which is AMX company, still going strong these days.
Still making really good tanks.
Yep. So that was big thing with their production line for that sort of stuff. Now we should talk about the Battle of Ston.
Oh, you want to go straight to Ston?
Well, I mean, you go talk about any other prior battles that you would like.
I just want to quickly mention there is talk that the ventilation vent on the side that isn't got the hatch for everyone to get in and out of, it had louvers, and there was one battle where the Germans aimed at the louvers thinking it was a weak point and had some success. You can see it in that picture right there. But apparently it was actually quite carefully designed to provide the equivalent armour thickness of the rest of the tank.
It had about 155 mils of armour compared to 55 for everywhere else, and so it was just the way it was sloped. Yes, you might be able to do something with it, but it was unlikely.
So the success of the Germans in that encounter probably had more to do with just scoring hits than...
The shot traps all around it, though, of being able to hit it and have the entire force of your round going, especially through the driver's spot, I guess. What we'd call it, it's not even a cupola, it's just a shot trap. where the rounds are going to hit and go straight through. I mean, there was a lot of armour there for the driver, but it wasn't, while it had a number of slopes in armoured spots, there were plenty of places that were a flat plane that if a round hit, it would hit hard. Unfortunately for the Germans, that they were only running around with they only had the 37mm guns for their anti-tank guns at that time, and so the rounds wouldn't go through.
Now, the other thing I think I want to mention before we move on is the 75mm gun mounted in the hull, not even in a sponson, like not even that low level. Totally unable to traverse the gun for fine tuning. It was at the height it was because some brilliant French person had this idea that they wanted to shoot through the slits in
the bunker slits
in bunkers
and pillboxes,
and that having the gun at the same elevation as the slits they were trying to shoot into would give them some sort of advantage.
So if you look on this tank now, you'll see this tiny little hole just there. That was the hull-mounted machine gun. You can't even see it. There's nothing else sticking out. It was just that little hole.
Yeah.
Was the
okay.
So there was no protrusion of the barrel of the hull-mounted machine gun out from the tank. You couldn't see where it was. There was just a tiny little hole in the front of the hull. That is where the bullets came out. Whether or not that gun ever got used in combat, I do not know. That would be bizarre if it ever did.
Now, Alan has asked if we can talk more about the problems with the French industry and their tracks, and the short answer is I just don't know more than what I've already said. I don't understand how it can be that hard, but apparently...
So they were welded tracks. They went from 460 mils or 46 centimetres wide for the B1 to 500 mils, 50 centimetres for the B1 Bis. Basically made them wider and heavier. It gave them more traction. That's pretty much what I got to.
Yep.
The companies, there is some good photos on the internet of the production line of the B1s by France, but they were all propaganda, whereby there was like 5 production lines going on at once with people working on them and hundreds of tanks being built all at the same time, which was all basically photoshopped in by the French government at the time to say, look how many tanks we're building, when realistically it was one production line rather than 5 in a row. Just they wanted to be able to show everybody, look, we're building lots of tanks, and this is what they look like. So again, they were trying to do lots of propaganda, and we'll get onto that, especially with the 2C, but they weren't investing a lot more. They should have been investing a lot more in the training and actually getting these tanks out to the troops earlier, rather than trying to put in the production into the propaganda of saying, look at all our wonder weapons that we're bringing out, and so forth.
Okay, Battle of Ston.
Now, so the one great hurrah of. It was the one great hurrah.
It was the great hurrah.
It was pretty spectacular, great hurrah.
There were quite a lot of instances where these tanks happily outcompeted once they were in the right place at the right time with German tanks. But Ston was a very spectacular success.
Yeah. So on May 16th in 1940, so the town of Ston in northern France had changed hands a number of times. As the Germans would advance in, the French would counterattack, knock down, push them out. The Germans would then turn around, counterattack again, come back in. Eventually, on May 16th, the B1 Bis Ure, or Ure, I don't know whatever the name of the town of.
They didn't have cool names.
They were just city names.
Yeah, but they had so few of them. I mean, I'm not sure they were all city names. Some of them were like famous French battles, but
there you go.
Yeah.
Anyway,
which also tend to be around French towns.
Yes,
but,
commanded by Captain Pierre Bilot, who then, after this battle, went on to become quite famous because of it all. He destroyed a column of German tanks, 11 Panzer IIIs and 2 Panzer IVs, and taking 140 hits to his B1, and still was managed to leave the battlefield undestroyed. So what has happened is the German Panzer columns has lined up ready to advance out of the town, and he's come in the morning, seen all these Panzer IIIs and Panzer IVs lined up in front of him, said, right, tapped the driver on told the gunner, the driver, so you line up at the first tank with the 75, I'll line up the rear tank with the 47. They've taken out both of those tanks in the first salvo, and then in the preceding time they've taken he's gone down the line and gone blat 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 and taken out the other 11 tanks as they go. There's the drivers taking out using the 75 to take out tanks, and he's taking out other tanks with the 47mm gun, and they've taken them all out, and whilst taking shots from all these Panzer IIIs and Panzer IVs and anti-tank guns that were around at the time, and was still able to drive away from it. So he then went on to eventually his tank broke down in the coming days. It was captured by the Germans, escaped, captured again, something like that. Escaped off to Russia, I think it was. Got returned to France as part of, and joined the resistance, and was a leader in the resistance, and then all sorts of fun and exciting. He's a man of many parts, and then became a politician after the war, and the Minister of Defence or something.
That
like
would be a good recommendation for your political campaign. I think looking at this battle, one is he was very good at handling his tank and tactical performance in terms of, the classic thing. Hit the front vehicle in the column, hit the back vehicle in the column, and then you can pretty much murder the rest of them.
That restricts their manoeuvrability, so they can't advance or retreat.
But what it did show about this tank, despite its many ludicrous design decisions, was that the armour was just thick enough to be impenetrable to most of what the Germans had. And the gun in the turret, even though it was a bit of an afterthought, was just powerful enough that it could destroy German armour.
Of the time, so as soon as the Tiger came out,
the Tiger was a big problem for everything.
The 47mm gun was not going to be able to do anything against it.
And it also does go to show French cannon makers were always actually pretty good, and also the armour makers. For all that we've got this ludicrous, construction, rivets and bolts, and the design of this 75mm gun taking up so much of the tank in a completely useless way, a steering system that requires a lubricant that no one can even know that they're supposed to use. Despite all of that, and the real question is, what did it cost? What could they have gotten better for the money?
Well, there wasn't anything better for the money in France. I mean, or by the Allies at that stage, because just remember, at this stage of the game, Russia was not an ally, even though they're coming out with the T-34s. They were still not an ally. They were allied to Germany.
I think that's that is the single biggest thing to think about. You've got this duck, and then in the T-34, you've got a 76mm gun in a traversing turret. With a 500 horsepower engine that runs on diesel, compared to the finicky, high-octane, contraption that the French had built in this tank. And yeah, the T-34 had numerous problems and quite a few questionable design decisions as well. But yeah, the Russians don't get enough credit for how far ahead of everyone they were.
Of course, they could have been building Matilda 2s.
What the Russians?
No, the French. But they weren't going to do that. They weren't going to do that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Anyway, it's interesting.
But that was not. But the fall of France was obviously not the end of the Char B1 because it was captured by the Germans. And what's the word for the booty tank? Butpanzer. Butpanzer. So 161 B1s captured by the Nazis.
And it does go to show how it was actually, despite having a very finicky supply train, they must have actually rated it to bother putting it into service. I know the Germans pretty much grabbed everything and tried to put it into service, but very particular needs for this thing, and they were still like, yeah, let's use it. I would also just go back to a moment. The one-man turret design, like we all criticised the overwork of the commander. The French weren't complete idiots. The French weren't idiots at all. And one of the things they wanted with the one-man turret was to have as much armour protection for the minimum weight, and that was why they wanted a one-man turret.
Right, okay.
Because then they could have a thicker, a better protected turret, for the same weight. And in its actual combat usage, when it got into the field, when it was
now
in
we
the
have
right
a
place at
picture
the right
of
time.
a Char B1 in Indochina. So
No, its name was Indochine.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
There you go. All right. So I was confused by the picture that's coming up on the screen now for our listeners. Mm-hmm. It was named Indochine. Okay, great. There you go.
Not just French towns.
Yeah, there you go. Mm-hmm. Well, it was France because France doesn't actually have colonies or other countries. It just has France. And France is everywhere. Yeah,
and Indochine was a big village. Yeah, okay. Just quickly, I want to acknowledge some of our listeners. Eugene's joined us. Captain ACAB is back from Philadelphia. We've got Garrett on the line. We've got Smurfo, Kilo 19. Who else have we got?
Board IT Tamer?
The board Itamar from Israel. Welcome, mate. Glad to have you with us.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to the Butte Panzers.
Yes. So we had
the Flammpanzers.
Yes, the Panzer Kampfwagen B2740F. Some were turned into Flamm tanks. Flammpanzers.
You see, for me, this is actually a really interesting, useful adaptation of this vehicle because the 75mm gun, we laugh and laugh and laugh, but you take that out and you put a flamethrower in there, and it's an infantry support vehicle. That's something to work with.
Some were made into self-propelled guns with a 10.5cm gun on it. Most of them, however, were used as police operations within occupied France. Some had the turret removed and became a turretless armoured supply vehicle. Where do we get to? Some were deployed to the Channel Islands, so when they took over the Channel Islands, conquering Britain as it were, they deployed some of the Char B1s there. 4 were deployed on the Eastern Front and took part in Operation Barbarossa. Yes, I bet they enjoyed that.
Some quartermaster somewhere just tearing out his castor oil. Where are we getting castor oil from?
From the medical tent.
Just for this one platoon of tanks.
From the medical tent, obviously. All right, 7 were deployed to the Balkans. Carrying out operations there as the.
If you want to beat up Yugoslav partisans, then
and the Greeks,
then this would have been a great tank for that, but overkill for logistical footprint.
There's some nasty terrain in there. You wouldn't. While it could go through the terrain, getting it there and actually supporting in that terrain would not be fun. We talked about it, the funny tracks and everything else, but it did have good terrain, all-terrain capabilities because of those tracks, and so you just grind through wherever it was going. There was a flame tank as part of Operation Market Garden. They helped.
That's right. Yeah, I mean they used it in one of the counterattacks.
Yep, and a number of tanks, a number of them were taken out by anti-tank guns during Market Garden.
I mean, it really would have been by 1944 quite a moment. Was Market Garden 44? Yeah. You know, to see these dinosaurs of the past lumbering towards you.
Yeah, and a number of the turrets were removed from the tanks and they were placed within bunkers at Normandy. So there would be the little 47mm guns would be sitting on top of a bunker on the top of the cliffs of Normandy,
they were tough
out.
turrets. I mean, and if you don't have any other command duties than sitting in the bunker firing at things, then it probably would have been okay. Yeah.
And as I said before, the Tiger 1 and 2 had steering wheels, and so along with the Char B1, sorry. Italy captured 8 B1s and did some testing and looked at them for a bit, and then ended up hiding 6 of them in a cave.
Always a very Italian use of a tank.
But that was not their use as Butte Panzers, as booty tanks, was not the end of the Char B1 because they were then taken after Normandy. A number of them were recaptured by the resistance and used and basically constituted the Free French Army armoured force, and forming up into the 13th Dragoons Regiment, and they had 19 of the Char B1s, recaptured Char B1s, recaptured Char B1s available for the Free French Army, and they were going around as being basically they were part of the recapture of Paris, and carrying out operations as part of the Free French Army after the liberation.
Yeah, I mean, I get that they wanted to use French tanks as opposed to having to drive around in American-made Shermans. And it's probably actually really important when you're trying to convince the French people that these people who've been living overseas for years are actually their countrymen, and that they're all part of the same project. So I get that. At the same time, I wouldn't be thrilled to be assigned to be a crewman in 1944.
But they were French. There are 11 surviving Char B1s. Now we're going to jump into the stats and figures for the Char 2C, which we don't have any pictures up at the moment. So it was a super heavy tank. This was the big boy. It was designed in 1917. It was a real World War I tank. It was produced from 1921. It was in service within France from 1921 to 1940, when they all got destroyed anyway. It had a crew of 12. Say again, a crew of 12.
Which was a reasonably common number for World War I tank crews.
Yeah.
There were a lot of jobs, and they didn't know, just stick another person in there.
They only built 10. There were 69 tons off the production line. 33.5 feet long, 10 feet wide, and 13 feet high, which is very big. It's a very big tank. It could do a maximum speed of 15 kph with 150 kilometre range. I don't think anybody expected it to get to 150 kilometres. It had it did have 2 engines in it. It had about 45 mils of armour all around. It had a 75mm gun in the hull. And 4 8mm machine guns, 1 in the hull, 1 on each in ball mounts and 1 on each side, and 1 in a rear-facing turret. Sorry, the 75mm gun was in a turret. So it had.
That's very advanced.
Yep.
I mean, considering the Americans couldn't get a 75mm in a turret till 1942, that's...
it had a lot of space in there. This is a huge tank. This was promoted as the super heavy tank by the French. It was... The army realised it was not a useful piece of kit, but the propaganda machine of the French government said this is the wonder tank, and it's going to do everything. So... but the army knew it was not of actually any use. During the actual war, when conflict, when the Germans actually came through, so they, as the Germans were advancing south towards Paris, the 10 tanks were, 2 of them were already broken down and been disposed of. The other 8 were on the line to defend the north of France, but they decided these wonder weapons were too important to be captured or destroyed, so they ordered all the remaining 8 south to defend further along the line. 2 were unable to even get started, and so they were destroyed in place. The other 6 were put onto trains and sent south away from the German offensive. And when the basically the dive bombers took out the rail lines and some of the rail cars and basically blocked all the rail lines from the south, from the north to the south of France, these 6 tanks became stuck and they couldn't get them off the trains, and so they left them there. The crews scuttled them. So 6 of the tanks got but only 5 of the tanks got scuttled, because one of them, where they put the explosive charges in and tried to blow it up, the charges failed to go, and so they just ran off, left them. Which is, I'm not going back into a tank to find out, why did this explosive not go off? I'm just going to leave that one.
Yeah, I mean, with Centurion there was a specific manual that said if the track cutting charge didn't detonate when it was supposed to, the commander had to make the long walk to inspect the fuse. He wasn't allowed to delegate that. When a charge hasn't detonated, it's a terrifying thing approaching it to see what's going on with it. And I don't have a lot of explosives handling, but I think I have. I can't remember exactly why I had to deal with something a bit like that. Yeah.
So if you want to know what it looks like, basically think of the Char B1 and make it twice as big, is what we're talking about here. So the one not destroyed, one Char 2C not destroyed, was then taken away by the Germans to Berlin as a war trophy, to show off, say, look at this wonder weapon we captured from the French, those piddly little French. However, once Berlin fell, it was still around within Berlin until 1948, when it mysteriously disappeared. Everybody suspects the Soviets took it. But they haven't shown it that they have it since then, so who knows what's actually happening.
Also, let's just remember, large chunks of steel have a value as large chunks of steel. So now it's always possible they end up just being scrapped. The
Lorraine command tank of the Char 2Cs was up-armoured to basically where it only had 45 mils of armour all around this huge behemoth of a tank. They up-armoured that to 60 mils, and it put the weight up over 75 tons, which made it one of the heaviest operational tanks ever. So it was driving around, it didn't actually do anything, but it was there, it was heavy, and it was operational. Now, we might...
Time for a break?
Time for a break, but we'll come back. We'll do a very quick overview of the ARL 44, the successor to the Char B1, and talk about that.
Now, so... what we're about to show you is the chat we had with Clayton, who provided us with this beautiful beer tube that you've all been enjoying the drinking of. Not as much as we have. But so we are doing a little modelling challenge for our community. So you need to get a Tamiya PZ38T 135 scale model, and over the next month we're doing the initial build, and we want you all to send pictures of the build into our social media, and then the next month we'll do the painting and see how we're all doing with paint, giving it paint jobs. So that's all going to be lots of fun. But in this video we're about to show you, Clayton walks us through what you're going to need to build it in terms of equipment, and it's all nothing that expensive. It's $5-6 here and there. Yeah, so that's what I'm going to show you now, and then we'll be back with much more after this message. All right, everyone. So at the Oz Armour Fest in August of 2022, we met Clayton, who's a reasonably long-term listener to the show, and many other things beside, especially a leader in the modelling community. And he's getting us started with our modelling challenge on the PZ38T. Clayton, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's quite the honour.
Excellent.
Welcome. It's not the first time you've been involved with Totally Tanked either, is it?
Well, yeah, we did cross paths obviously in Cairns, and yeah, shared a few stories and a few beers and whatnot. And yeah, no, long-term listener. Yeah, here I am. Good time guy.
Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having
Clayton,
me.
before we get into what people are going to need for our PZ38T challenge, can you just tell us a bit about what you do in modelling and your Facebook group?
Modelling. So my modelling presence is Workbench Hobbies. I do a lot of posting. That's where you'd find me mainly on Facebook, would be Workbench Hobbies. I do have a website, Workbench Hobbies, as well. I do a lot of reviewing for the modelling news, and anyone who sort of has been around modelling or scale modelling would be really familiar with that website. It's just themodelingnews.com. Lots of reviews, build reviews, things like that. I've been doing that for a long time. And I also write for one of the international magazines, Model Military International. So yeah, doing articles and reviews and how-tos and things like that. So yeah, that's me. Been modelling pretty much all my life. Dropped out, obviously around that sort of 19, 20-year-old, when it didn't become sort of cool anymore and girls weren't interested, and there was beer and going out and all those things to do. Always sort of kept one foot in it, but didn't really practice the hobby, so to speak. But yeah, sort of, I don't know, maybe 12, 13 years ago, work was very stressful, whatnot. My wife suggested, why don't you get back into the hobby as a way of stress relief? And yeah, I think she probably regrets that suggestion now, because it's become such a big part of my life. But yeah, it's just a hobby I love. It's a hobby that gives me so much. It's a hobby I want to share with other people, because I think, it's got so much to give everybody in different ways that you wouldn't even consider, and things you get out of it. So yeah, that's where I'm at. I've actually just started filming for YouTube videos, like how-tos and stuff. That's a bit of a boom thing. So yeah, that's the goal this year, is to get some videos up and get a bit of a footprint on YouTube. I think
awesome. I mean, I know if for me, part of the research process when we're doing a new episode is obviously you do a lot of online reading, and then I'll be hitting up the videos, seeing what the chieftain had to say, is always a big one. And then the tank museums, tank chats. And then by the time you get to about the 4th or 5th video, it's either War Thunder reviews or people saying this is how good the Tamiya kit is, or the Revell kit, or whatever.
Or where it is, where you find it on Girls on Panzer.
We'll need to do a Girls and Panzer episode one day. Yeah,
there's a whole model line of that as well,
yep.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I did see it.
Yeah.
So as well as all the Lego models as well.
Right. Yeah, kind of a little bit frowned upon in the modelling world, but yeah, we won't go there.
I mean, where do you draw the line between your full-blown, 135 scale kits, and then going into the more simple game models, say, and then and then you get into the Kobe Lego kits? Where does the discerning modeler draw the line between what's serious and what isn't?
Well, I guess, yeah, I don't think it matters really at the end of the day. I think it's just that creative process, and what works for one modeler mightn't work for another. And yeah, there's no hard and fast rules. You just build what you like, and some scales are going to be more popular than others. Like the kit that we're looking at for this one is kind of the popular scale. The 35th scale has been traditionally the popular scale, but there's smaller scales. There's 48 scale, there's 72nd scale. The latest thing now is 1/16th, so they're actually getting bigger.
Mm.
Yeah, where do you draw the logic? I don't draw that. Like, yeah, it's people are people, everyone's different, and some people will only build one scale and only build one subject. But I like to sort of spread my wings, and it's strange. Each genre is quite different. Like I couldn't build a car model successfully. I could build it, but to finish it to the standard that some of the car modelers do is just, it's a whole different discipline. And and the aircraft builders will build different to the armor builders, and it's funny, you see these sort of styles come through. So yeah, where do you draw? Yeah, you just build what you like, really. Yeah, there's no rule.
Okay, and it's also an interesting thing with certainly in more recent times, probably as much effort goes into building a setting and the diorama for the model as for the actual assembly of the plastic kit, doesn't it?
Yeah, if that's what you want from it. I mean, some people just build them, don't paint them, don't finish them. It just depends where you get your joy from the hobby. Like that whole, that whole diorama and vignette. I mean, that's a whole nother set of whole different set of discipline and skills. And it looks awesome. Like when you finish your kit and you can, put it in a little landscape scene or city ruins or something. I mean, it just adds another level to it. But yeah, look, again, there's no hard and fast rule. If you just want to build the kit and build it, yeah. But I mean, the other part of the hobby that sort of no one really speaks about is the collecting side of things. That most modelers, not even serious modelers, just part-time modelers, just ask a modeler about their stash. And yeah, it's usually their little shame. Like it's the garage is filled with kits and kits and kits, and cupboards are filled with kits. Yeah, so that's the other arm of the hobby, and yeah, that's a slippery slope, that one. So
how big is your stash then?
Well, that's a personal question, Robert. Yeah, it's big. It's big. Yeah, the garage is full. Work, obviously there's all spaces at work is overloaded. They're in attics, in cupboards. Yeah, it's pretty bad.
And once you've built them, where do you then put them? On display, or do they just go into a cupboard somewhere? Or
I've got a display case in here in the model room, so to speak. I've got a display case in my office at work. I do build for other people, so I do commission stuff as well. So I would build it and then ship it off to them. Some of my older stuff that obviously wasn't sort of up to scratch anymore, I'd probably give to like the kids, cousins and things like that. So yeah, but I mean, some people just pop them on the shelf. That they just become a bit of a dust magnet. If that's it. It just depends what you want out of your models. Like some people, put, I don't know, 40, 50 hours into a kit, and they'll get a little, display case made up. And, but yeah, I've got 2 dedicated display cases in my workspace and here at home. That's where I display mine.
And just out of interest, how much time would you spend in the painting versus the assembly?
Usually assembly is pretty quick. Yeah. So a 35th scale model like the one we've proposed here would probably take me, I don't know, maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours to build it. Pardon me. And to finish it, I'd probably be like 25 hours or something, maybe 30.
Right.
Yeah.
Is that just... Sorry, is that just painting the vehicle, or are you have you got your commander sticking out the top and you're rouging his cheeks? And,
well, see that's another discipline altogether, is figure painting, right? So there's all these different skills, and every time you think you're sort of starting to get good at one thing, you'll get found out, like trying to paint, a face that's this big, But there's joy in that as well. I mean, there's real joy in putting that together and painting this little figure that just looks like a little bloke, So painting a figure would probably take me about 3 or 4 hours from start to finish. Yeah, but I mean, there's like back to the tank, it just depends on how far you want to take it. If you just want to paint it in pans of grey, have it sitting there that looks like it's just come straight out of the factory, that might take you a couple of hours. If you want to make it look like it's been through the battlefields in Russia and it's got mud and chipped and rust and stowage and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, that's usually a kit would take me 25 to 30 hours from start to finish.
Fair enough. Now, just working through what we're doing with this kit. So it's the Tamiya 1 in 35 scale Panzer 38T. Now, obviously, this is a tank we haven't featured yet in the show, and we are going to do an episode when we get to the culmination of this model build, because it's a really underrated tank historically. It's basically the tank the Germans used to conquer France, which they stole from the Czechs. But so that's the kit people need if they want to join the challenge. And I know a few people have already been in touch wanting to get involved, so we're off to a flying start. Now, what other equipment are people going to need to do this justice?
Well, are you going to distribute that little sheet
Yeah, I've got the sheets you sent me, and so if people want to hit up our Twitter or our Facebook, we will have those up there once this episode goes to air. But I guess I just walk us through the items that are on your list, and some of them. I mean, obviously glue used to join the bits together. That one's easy. But things actually is the glue included in the kit, or do you recommend people get an extra one?
The one that was recommended to me from the website is this Tamiya, but I was going to ask today whether or not you take it.
That's what you want. Okay, Tamiya extra thin. And the glue is really important, and there's a lot of choices with glue, but that you can't go wrong if you get that one, that Tamiya extra thin, the little bottle with the green cap. It comes with an applicator brush.
So look here for another example of it. There we go.
Yeah.
Right below the model.
That'd be the one to get. If you can't get that Revell contactor, it's just in a different sort of style of bottle, and I would just encourage everyone to have a look on the page for this cheat sheet. So obviously glue is very, very important. The next thing I would recommend would be the sprue cutters, like the little nippers.
Now, when I was a kid doing my models, I used my dad's toenail clippers. But these, I used to do a bit of 3D printing, so I've got quite a good pair of sprue cutters that look like this. So that's for cutting the parts out of the plastic frameworks, the sprues.
Yeah, that's correct. So the sprue cutters, it's just a better tool. So can you do it with toe clippers? Yeah, of course you can do it with toe clippers. You can do it with a butter knife if you want, but you'll get it'll just
it'll hurt.
Yeah, you'll get a bad cut, and it'll just parts won't fit together properly and whatnot. So the sprue cutters, they're angled. They're designed to clip the part off from the sprue cleanly. You can pay anything from about $5 up to $150 for a decent pair of sprue nippers. So again, it just depends how serious you want to get. But yeah, look, a half decent pair, probably $8-9, and they'll last you forever. And I'd recommend them, better than the toe clippers.
Okay. You've also got a knife or scalpel on the list here. Walk us through what that's for in the process.
So no matter how tight you can get with those sprue clippers, you're always going to get a little burr or little mold mark and things. And just with the molding process of the parts of the models too, you'll get like little bits of flash and seams where the two molds are coming together. So what you can do with the edge of the knife or scalpel is just tidy those parts up. Just running the blade over the molded piece will clean up any seam lines. But again, this is just going to depend what you want to get out of your modeling. Some people won't care about that, but if you sort of build a few more models and start to get into it, the first thing, if you go to competitions or enter a competition, if you haven't cleaned up seam lines and bits and that, like it's just, they're the immediate tells that, something's not quite right. But so the tidier you can make the part, the better the model is going to fit together as well.
Okay, so the sprue cutters for cutting it off the sprue, as it seems obvious now that we say it. The knife's just for shaving it so that it's nice and even along the edge.
Tidying it up, cleaning it up, I would just use a scalpel or hobby blade,
Great. Now, you've also got sanding sticks on this list. That's for a bit more of that fine cleaning?
Yeah, that would be a little bit more tidying up. Again, that's not a must-have. That's just if you start to get a little bit more serious about your modeling, that's what you do. Or you could use, like an emery board or like a nail file. It's not a must-have. It's just a nice to have. They're just, like with the wheels of the tank, you'll find there'll be a seam around. If you've got a sanding stick, you just work your way around it. And you can't cut your finger on a sanding stick. At least I haven't yet.
Yeah, you got to really work at it.
Yeah.
Now,
Yes,
so
mate,
just
the number of scalpel cuts I've got on various fingers from old days of modelling. Yes.
I like it.
No trips to hospital, but a couple of
You haven't tried hard enough.
Yeah, a couple of deep scalpel cuts.
now the aspiring knife guy inside myself wants to know: are the sanding sticks all the same grit, or do you use multiple passes of different grits for this stuff?
Yeah, you would go coarse to start and then go fine. But look, something middle of the road. I think 800 grit sounds about right. Would be a fairly multi-purpose kind of a sanding stick. But I mean, you could use sandpaper from Bunnings or whatever if you wanted as well. It's just a way to tidy parts up.
Yeah, but if you can have your abrasive already on a applicator, then that's making life easier, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, definitely. It's a little bit spongy as well, so it'll give when you're going around corners and things like that.
Okay, excellent. Now, decal softener, talk us through that.
Okay, again, this is not a must-have. This is just a nice to have. And again, this is just going to be what you want to get out of your modeling. But so what happens when you've painted your model and you've got the kit will come with decals or water slide transfers, whatever you want to call them. So you would put them on the painted surface, and sometimes it gets little bits of air stuck under them, and it will cause what's called silvering, which when you put it on the surface, you'll see like it'll just obviously not look like a painted number on the model. It'll look like it's a sticker stuck on the model. So the decal softener will help alleviate that and help give you a cleaner finish with that. It's just going to depend how far down this hole you want to go. It's not a must-have, but it's a nice to have. And that decal softener, about $8 or $9, would last you a lifetime of modeling.
Now, when I was a wee lad making my model, a few tanks, a few aeroplanes.
I bet you had a F4 Phantom in there like the rest of us.
No, I had a Hurricane, definitely BF-110. Anyway, getting back to this, getting the decals on, sometimes they just worked perfectly and sometimes they would never stick on. And I knew some people who just super glued them on. What's the correct way to do them?
Well, yeah, this is there's so many variables in that question you just asked, because each manufacturer will produce their decals slightly differently, and some perform better than others. The integrity of the surface of the model you're trying to put it on will have a bearing on that. Best way to do it, and there's always arguments in the modeling community about how this should be done, but essentially I would put a gloss varnish over. I'd paint my model. So for instance, this one would be Panzer Grey. I'd put a gloss varnish on it, let it dry, wet the surface, and I'd put a little bit of this decal softener on the surface, then put the water slide transfer on, then put a bit more of this softener on top, and just let it sit, and it'll settle down into the surface, and then dab it away, and then I would varnish it again. But okay. Yeah, I don't want to overcomplicate things too much for the people who haven't built models before, because we can worry about that at another time.
Do you wash the sprues? I know with Warhammer 40k, one of the things used to be is you'd just give the sprue a bit of a wash before trying to paint it, just to give it a chance to take any chemicals off the actual plastic.
So back in the old days, they used to use like release agents and things like to release the trees out of the molds. It doesn't really, it's not a thing anymore. And again, this is a bit of an argument in the modeling community. Wash them, don't wash it. I've never washed a set of sprues in my life, and I've never had any issues. So So you're right in what you said. And if you want to do it, it's not going to hurt. It's just I guess it's a bit of an insurance policy, but I wouldn't bother washing these sprues.
Great. Now, in terms of paint, it's obviously a Tamiya kit. You're recommending we go with the Tamiya colours, and you think just the three, the rubber black, the German grey, and the dark yellow will get us where we need to go?
Yes, I could probably add red brown in that as well, because we need to paint our tracks, and I hadn't considered that when I put my little cheat sheet together. I didn't, again, paint and different types of paint is a real rabbit hole, and if you understand that, your modeling will you're going to do yourself so many favors, because there's so many lessons to learn around paint. I didn't recommend Tamiya paint because it was a Tamiya kit. I recommended Tamiya paint because it's the most forgiving, and it's probably the most user-friendly, I think, is the best way to say it. We can brush paint that, which a lot of people won't have an airbrush, but if you are in the modeling world for a certain amount of time, it'll become really obvious to you, oh man, I need an airbrush. And once you hit that airbrush stage, you go next level. But this will get us there.
Okay, and then brushes, you're just saying in terms of the must-haves, a basic synthetic brush set around $15.
Yes. So you've got a mix of a few flat brushes, a few I don't know what's the term, pointy brushes, I guess. just fine
brushes.
That'll do. Yeah, just a good general purpose brush set, just to get started. And this is going to be different for everyone, but this will serve the beginner well.
Okay, all right. So that's a good little walkthrough of what people are going to need if they don't already have it. I think we're going to have a significant variance of skill and experience levels going on, but that's enough to get a model together and looking respectable.
Yeah, yes, to answer your question. And then how far down the rabbit hole do you want to go with it? Because
sure.
I think for a lot of people, just the achievement of building it and seeing the lines of the vehicle and the scales and how big the commander is compared to the tank, like that's the joy I get out of the construction, is the scales and the lines and seeing all the parts round, and like that's why I love your podcast so much, you guys, because I get that history side of things, and this marriage for the modeling is the modeling and the subjects, and then I get to marry it with the history and just create something. Yeah. Did I answer your question there? I don't know.
You gave us a lovely compliment at any rate. That's the main thing.
Just tell us how great we are. We'll go with that. Rob, have you got any questions?
No, I think I've gone through all the things that jumped into my mind, and as you said about the paintbrushes, you just got to keep them away from children, and otherwise they'll use them on their own activities, and display the tips of your nice fine pointed paintbrush. But that's about it. There will be
there's techniques with using the glue, and there's techniques with using the paint as well. So I might, if it's okay with you guys, just have maybe try and put something little together so might help you with the process of the painting and things like that.
With the paints, do you use any washes or just the straight paints?
Wow, you've been doing your research.
Well, no, as I said, I used to paint the old 40K models.
Yeah,
mass armies of green skins, and I was not a fine painter. I was very much slapdash. Let's figure out something and see what I can convert.
Yeah, but you do slapdash, and then you put a dry brush on. And sorry, you do a wash and a wash.
Base coat. Black base coat, then another green base coat, and then a wash, and then a bit of dry brushing, and away you go.
Yeah, nice. Well, look, you can use all of those techniques with your armor models as well. Like, will we do a wash on this? Absolutely. I haven't allowed that in the buy list here, because again, you know, when you start putting washes, do you do acrylic wash? Do you do an enamel wash? Do you do an oil wash? You know, so this is where it starts to get a little bit messy. So I guess we should try and cater to just maybe the entry level modeler, and then just to make
Don't
sure.
worry, I'm an entry level modeler. It's just
Yeah.
I went through a lot of. I got to probably the 51% standard of capabilities and said, yeah, that'll do me.
Yeah, but like, I mean, you're talking black basing, you're talking washing, you know, all sorts of stuff. So yeah, you've got a basic, or you know, at least a basic understanding of some of these techniques. So yeah, you're in good stead. You know, this will be good. You will do well.
Clayton, just quickly, with our background in miniature painting, normally you just hit them with a spray paint out of a can. Is that something you would do with a model, or would you put an undercoat on like that, or would you just go straight onto the plastic with your paints?
It's always a really good idea to prime your model. Actually, but that reminds me of something else. I'll come back to that. It's always a good idea to prime your model, which can be done through a rattle can. I do it through my airbrush.
Sure.
Do you have to do it? No, you don't have to do it, especially with those Tamiya paints, because they're an acrylic lacquer, so they're actually really quite strong and they will bind quite well. If you were painting with like a true acrylic paint or something like that, yeah, that's when priming your model starts to become really important. I don't want to overcomplicate things too much. We're talking about acrylics and enamels and stuff like that. So yeah, maybe for another time. This kit does have a small piece of photo etch in it. Rob, I don't know if you saw that. It's the mesh grill over. I think it's maybe the exhaust cover or so. I'm talking from memory, but it's a little bit of photo. It's a little piece of metal. You will require super glue to hold that on, or CA glue. So you probably have to get a little bit of super glue from. You could probably get it from Woolies in the little tubes for next to nothing. But that Tamiya paint will not hold that part on the model.
Okay, good to know. All right, Clayton, thank you so much for joining us and putting those cheat sheets together for us, which, like I said, will be on our Facebooks and Twitters by the time anyone outside of us sees this. And on that, we might let you go and get back to the rest of the show.
Yeah, no dramas. And yeah, Phil, if anyone's got any questions or needs any guidance or help, yeah, please reach out to me through Facebook. More than happy to help.
What's the name of the Facebook again?
Workbench Hobbies.
Okay.
Thanks, Clayton.
All right.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks so much.
We'll be producing more Totally Tanks soon enough.
Love it. See you, boys.
Thank you once again to Clayton. That was a wonderful talk, and we're looking forward to what we're going to get up to over the next couple of months, building models, which I haven't done for quite a long time. But anyway, it was fun when I used to do it.
So just to clarify, this month buy yourself the Tamiya PZ38T kit, the 135 scale, and build it, and send in your photos to our social medias. And we'll share those as we go, and Rob and I will attempt it ourselves. And
I've got to resist the urge of orcifying it up and painting it green, painting it red, and making it go fast, and putting some orcs hanging out the side of it.
Yeah, we're not doing painting this month, so next month we all move on to painting. This month we're just trying to get it built. Right. You generally have some choices for where you put the cream. Anyway, you can all figure out what you want to do with that.
Snotlings in it, then you can.
Yes.
Do it. Okay, we've got a couple of questions in the chat. We had was the turret was cast steel. That's correct, and that's one of the limitations on the production run. Was the turrets were only built by one company rather than all five, and so that one company then had to provide those cast turrets to. So yes, it made it stronger. There was no rivets on that, unlike the rest of the hull. It was a good turret for that in that regard, even though it was only one person, heavily armoured. But it was a choke point on the production line, and when those turrets were then taken off and placed as on top of bunkers as part of the Normandy seawall defence by the Germans, yes, they had they had good enough gun depression and elevation to be able to, well, at least take out any ships coming in, whether or not they could, and be able to shoot troops on the beach. They could do that as well. But again, obviously, once they got up against the cliffs at the bottom of the beach, they wouldn't have the gun depression to get down onto those. So there would be a field of fire where it would be very effective, because it was a very effective. The SA-35 was a very effective gun made by the French. With that out of the way, we're going to go on to beer review. Now, for those of us wondering what beer Rob has got for a French tank today, well,
Cornelius tried to cheat. Good try.
Good try.
I would have let you cheat, but
he doesn't know.
I didn't know.
The beer we're having, as I'm going to call it, a Char. So for those who can see, it's a Lid Ripper Hazy IPA by the Char company, and I've just made it from a Char to a Char. So we're having a New Zealand lazy Lid Ripper Hazy IPA and I'm calling it. I've made it the U into an A, and we're calling it a Char.
Now, the Char Brewery has an enormous reputation as producers of good beer. They are very famous, probably up there with Garage Project in New Zealand on reputation. It's a stinky one.
It's a very smelly beer.
Fragrant, we should say. Fragrant. One does not stink, one fragrance.
Now, the reason I got this is because I went into my local Plonk market, beer sellers that has lots of range of things, and they've shut up shop until the renovations at the local markets are done. And when I got there, I go, well, okay, I guess I'm stuffed then. But I found the Char in another bottle shop, and I said, you know what, that's close enough for me. It's something special, and I'm sure John will love talking about a hazy IPA Lid Ripper.
I have thoughts on hazy IPAs. Behemoth Brewing, co.nz. Apparently it's been made with American and Australian hops. They don't say which ones, which means they can substitute them when they run out. Late hopped and dry hopped. So late hopping means pretty much when you turn the flame out on your boil, you chuck some more hops in. That's where I do most of my hopping, to be honest. And then dry hopped is at some point while it's fermenting, you chuck some more hops in, which is tremendously wasteful on hops, but does give a lot of more delicate flavours.
We are thinking about all our New Zealand breweries after cyclone.
Weeks of cyclones and floods.
Going through, so poor buggers.
Yeah. And also, they make a point out of, it's got oats, barley, oats and wheat, which is a pretty standard sort of, particularly for a hazy.
For the Char team, they're saying life is too short to be taken seriously all the time. Relax, have a laugh and enjoy good beer. We're here to help. Seriously good beer, seriously fun beer, brought to you by a seriously awesome team of people who put some seriously silly things on a label. So the Lid Ripper Hazy IPA is our take on an unfiltered hazy IPA made with pale malts, oats and wheat, and a special English ale yeast. It's late hopped and dry hopped. I think you said all those things, didn't you?
Yep.
P.S. Drink this beer soon. Fresh is best. It is a 440ml can. It is 6.9%, so it's 2.4 standard drinks. Mm-hmm. So it's
also got a lot of green in the can, which is a problem for you holding it up to the screen.
It does, doesn't it? Because it'll disappear.
Yeah.
In the green screen. It's orange. The green becomes the white. The green becomes orange on the screen.
Well, it does for this moment where you've got an orange background, but if you hold it up higher, it'll go back to green. There you go.
There you go. Anyway, so that's our beer review. But don't worry, boys and girls. I did actually.
There is a French beer.
There is a French beer.
It's in here.
Yep. We'll get onto that one.
We're going to talk about some other things, and we'll come back and talk about the French beer. But this, some people like hazy IPAs. I am not the biggest fan in the world. Some of them are fantastic. It's fine. It's murky, and it's got a lot of hop flavors. It actually, for all that they used American and Australian hops in this, it actually tastes like New Zealand hops. So I guess they've gone to type.
Well, Tasman, you're on the market.
Anyway, just don't ruin the surprise.
Don't ruin the surprise. Yeah. Anyway, all right. So let's getting back into tanks, and the successor to the Char B1 was the ARL 44. So if you see any pictures of the ARL 44, you can see the tracks wandering around the hull, just like the Char B. It was designed under the nose of those Nazis. So whilst France was occupied, so it was designed after Vichy France fell, so after 42. So between 44, in 1943, they started designing the next tank for the Free French. Whenever they got the chance, they had to disguise it from their Nazi overseers. But they came up with a number of ways of doing that and saying, but eventually what they ended up doing was taking the hull of the Char B1 and then saying, okay, let's put a turret on it with a bigger gun. And because by that stage they'd seen turrets with bigger guns on them, so they said, right, that's what we're going to do. So, but it was produced from 1949 to 1951. So again, it was. They designed it in 44. They were really hoping to get it out for the end of the war. They ended up having 60 of them built. It was weighing 50 tons, so it was quite a hefty tank by the end of by 1949. The hull had a very strong hull armour with 120 mils front armour, but a weaker turret. So where you'll see it mainly these days is in various War Thunder or World of Tanks, whereby it'll be a very good tank with the hull armour, but the turret armour is a bit thinner and it's got a good gun. 34.5 feet long, so just as big as the Char 2C. So again, a really big tank, 11 feet wide and 10.5 feet wide. So it's...
So how many widths?
11 feet wide and 10.5 feet high.
High, yep.
High,
Okay.
yep. It had a 90 mil. It started off with a 75 mil gun. They said no, that's not big enough. We want to put a 90 mil gun in it. It had two 7.5 machine guns and 35. So it had a 350 kilometer range and could do a maximum of 35 kilometers an hour on road. The engines are the fun parts of this, and so the French couldn't build themselves any decent engines during this period of time. So what they ended up doing is taking some captured Maybach.
Not the Maybachs.
Yes, Maybach V12 engines, and they said, you know what? These are ours now, and they stuck them in their tanks. And so
the strength of the Panzers was not the Maybach engines, but okay.
So look, and the main reason they were bringing them out was. So they developed them under the Germans' noses, but after Normandy, France wanted to regain its prestige and position at the table. So where the Allies had, so you had the Americans, the Brits, and the Soviets, they were all calling the shots, but the French wanted to be in that situation and making those and being able to contribute, and said, you know what, to do that, we have to be able to provide tanks. So they looked at what tanks were on offer, and they said, okay, yes, we've recaptured, and this is not from June 44 we're looking at. Yes, we've retaken a number of our own Char B1s, and we're running around with those with the Free French Army, but into the future we want to contribute more and new tanks. So they came up with the design for, and they had the design for the ARL 44. So they said, right, we're going to put this design into production in order to say we are a serious force that people need to take seriously and give us, because again, we're one of the biggest nations in Europe, and we should be able to make decisions and based upon what we're doing.
France has, with very good reason, considered itself to be a world power for a very long time, and
they're still a world power.
Yeah,
they're still the ones running around doing a lot of stuff.
Yeah. That they also, I mean, you know, basically you could go back to the Franco-Prussian War for French making quirky design decisions that don't actually work, and you know, terrible command decisions. And one thing I did want to talk about was one thing you need to understand with French military production in the interwar period. which goes a bit to Alan's question about why they couldn't make decent tank tracks, was that the French governments, plural, were more worried about coups d'etats by the French army than they were worried about invasion by the Germans. And if you look back through a little bit of French history, you'll see that this is not a trivial concern.
No.
So their decisions for how they managed conscription, how they managed troop training, how they managed all of their army.
What they were doing with all the Germans in the Foreign Legion,
Yeah.
besides sending them to Indochina.
Yeah, all of these things were based on a very real concern that basically the French government didn't trust the army with very good reason. So that's something to bear in mind, trying to understand why they made some weird decisions.
Just remember,
sometimes.
it was the French military that surrendered in June 40, not the French government. Or have I got that the wrong way around?
No, I think
sure
you're right. And then Pétain was willing to form a German puppet government. And yeah, the politics of May and June 1940. A lot of exciting things happened all at the same time.
Yeah, there was
as happens when your country is collapsing.
Yeah, but there was the controversy was there was the generals who surrendered France, not the actual government of the day. Look. So from November 44, the decision was made. We're going to build these ARL tanks, ARL 44s. It was hoped to have 50 tanks per month from May of 45 in the production line for the French factories. It was always seen as a transitional tank, but of course in May of 45, something happened that meant that why bother doing all this work for a tank that's not actually needed anymore, because the war ended in Europe, I should say.
Yeah, and it's one thing that doesn't get talked about a lot is the way Germany dealt with its conquered territories. So one thing they could have done would have been to say, hey, France is a vital, enormous economy and we're in control of it now. Let's keep it full of resources and productive and be part of an expanded Reich. Or you can do what they did, which is say, we're going to starve this of resources, we're going to starve it of food, and we're going to concentrate everything we've got to German companies in German territory, which, you can understand the biases inherent to that. But if you're actually trying to establish a European empire by conquest, that's probably not the way to do it. But so France from 1940 barely had enough fuel to get the tractors running to get the crops in. Barely. There was some hungry years.
All right, so it started out as a heavy tank because it was 50 tons. However, by 1949, when it actually rolled in production, it was designated as a tank destroyer, which is why you might see it in games designated one way or the other. When it came out in 49, it replaced a number of Panthers that the French army had been using to fill that role at that stage. So,
yeah, as we've said, the French army's use of the Panther, one suspects that's because they had a lot of Panther crewmen from the Reich participating, but particularly in the Foreign Legion where they use them in Indochina. But, yeah.
It only attended one public event, which was Bastille Day in 14th July 1951, where it rolled down the Champs-Élysées to show off that this is the tank of the future.
Tank of the future.
No, it was the transitional tank. It only lasted from 1949 to 1953, when it was basically replaced by... can't remember actually.
I mean, an AMX something.
And there were thoughts about what to do with them, whether or not to sell them off, give them to somebody else. How many did I say were built? 60. Only 60 of them were built because again numbers. But in December of 1954, the decision was made to scrap them. So. Rather than do anything else useful with them, they said, you know what, just use them as target practice and get rid of them.
Super heavy tanks.
There was no substance to the rumour that they were exported to Argentina. So because of their decision to scrap them, there are only 3 surviving ARL 44s in existence these days at Bovington, the Samoa. Museum, and another tank regiment museum somewhere in France. Yeah, so it's only the only 3 around. So that was the ARL 44, which again really was the successor to the Char B1. It had a good gun. It's if you see it in games these days, it actually is very effective because of the size of the 90mm gun, and it's pretty much the only time you're actually going to see any use out of it. It didn't get sent off to Indochina or anything, or Vietnam or anything like that.
Oh, can you imagine? It was the first bridge, the first rice paddy, squish. It would have just been training for your tank recovery vehicles.
So it didn't see any action as it was, but we don't think we'll be doing any further podcasts on these two very limited tanks. So we thought we'd throw it in with the successor to the Char 2C and the successor to the Char B1 was the ARL 44. That's pretty much on those two things, and we're still chugging through our hazy IPA. It doesn't go down as quick as the lagers that were having before.
So I've got a couple of things I want to talk about. Firstly, let's bring up the patrons. There they go. Look, we got 5 more this month, which is amazing.
We love you all.
So I just want to thank them by name because we don't have that many patrons yet, and they are putting not a lot of money, but some real money on the table. So we really appreciate you guys.
We really do.
So our first patron ever was David Mulvaney, followed by Vikram Murthy. Our only top tier level patron is Stamps. We really appreciate you, dude. Brian Jenkins, Scotch 12, Carter Heller, Persicora, HMS Inconceivable, Floaty Burb. There's someone whose thing is just a full stop. So full stop, thank you. James Peters, Eugene, and joining us while the feed has gone to air, and so not in the title card I prepared, is Fartmaster. So thank you, Fartmaster, for your contribution. We do appreciate it. Okay, so
we're happy to say the name because we.
That is that, and we're going to move now to our graphics for the second part of the show. But quickly, a few things happened in the last month. One is we now have a couch in the studio because I've moved house, and we now have a dungeon, as mentioned, and we're recording from the sex room, so that's good. Yeah, but you know, it's not a bad space to be recording in actually, and the internet's blazing fast. We've got fibre hooked up all the way to the house. I also turned 50, which is a moment for pause and sadness and just like, what the hell have I done with my life? But I've got a tank podcast.
My turn's coming up in a couple of months.
Yeah, but Rob, I was sitting in bed just before I turned 50, and I was feeling a bit sad and sorry for myself and thinking about what I've done with my life. And John Dolan from Radio War Nerd slid into my DM saying, "Hey, we need to talk about tanks in Ukraine, and you know a lot about tanks. Do you want to be on the show?" And for those who don't know, Radio War Nerd is a subscription-only podcast, and even more so than us, has a very left-wing bent. It also has a lot of ties into Russian intelligence, which gives a really pointed analysis of things happening in the US, because the Russians pay a lot of attention to that. So, yeah, a very interesting show that I've been following for years, and I got to be in an episode, and that was awesome. So we have got a bunch of Radio War Nerd listeners have joined this podcast as a result of that. So welcome, Radio War Nerd folks. We're glad to have you with us. So that was awesome. One thing that came out of that was that I talked about submerged welding of the T-34 as part of Russia's, which we talked about in our T-34 episode. And we've mentioned
many moons ago, but it's still very relevant because it was an innovation of tank manufacturing, of being able to carry out these making welded hulls.
Yeah. Now, as a result of
welded
that,
armor.
An expert in submerged welding has been in touch to set me straight. I'm a dummy who thought submerged meant underwater. So,
you do.
I was wrong. And that's cool, because now I've learned, and now you as the audience can learn with me. So submerged welding refers to submerging the pieces of metal you're trying to weld under flux, which is the powder you use to stop oxygen getting into it. It's an automated welding technique. You've got machines doing it. You've got your jigs set up. You put your piece of metal together, and then you put so much flux powder over the top of it that the welding head is moving between through the flux, and that is submerged welding, which the Russians invented. Is still an important welding technique, and was pioneered for the T-34. So, like 3/4 of what we said was entirely accurate, but it's not done underwater, because who'd have thought submerged didn't mean underwater? So that is something we've learned.
Something that is underwater. Mm-hmm. The Nord Stream gas pipeline.
We're getting there. Seymour Hersh. Now, this is the tie-in. After I was on Radio War Nerd a couple of weeks ago, Seymour Hersh, who's one of the more legendary journalists of the 20th century and is still working even now as we approach the midpoint of the next century, published an exclusive that it was the Americans who had blown up the Nord Stream pipeline.
So, I mean, the only thing I know about from Seymour Hersh is the My Lai massacre story. Yep. So, for those who don't know, My Lai was a war crime by the American Army in Vietnam, and it basically blew everything up out of the water, where the American military and government would love to have basically covered all that up and not admitted it. But Seymour was the one who got it out there, and people had to start taking notice.
He's had an enormous number of scoops.
That was like 1971?
Around then.
I want to say that.
He's had an enormous number of scoops through his career. He has an enormous number of deep contacts in the American security state. And for people to dismiss him as a disgruntled blogger, in Australia we have a guy called John Menadieu, who's been one of the most senior public services in this country's history. And he, in his late retirement, is running a blog where his fellow elderly but very experienced people write a lot of things, and we'll get the same thing, that they'll have an exclusive saying something terrible is being done by the Australian government, and it'll just be like, a disgruntled blogger, and it's like, hang on, this person has pedigree and history and real achievement. And similarly with Seymour Hersh and his Nord Stream story, that it was the US that blew it up. Because remember, at this point, no one a huge piece of infrastructure, an incredibly important piece of infrastructure, has been destroyed. We have the picture of the gas welling out of it, And
it's not something you can just do on from your weekend fishing boat. Go down, scuba dive down and blow up a piece of significant infrastructure in the Baltic Sea.
Yeah, I was willing to accept that maybe the Ukrainians did it themselves because they wanted Germany to be decoupled from Russia.
So, for those who don't understand the situation, the Nord Stream gas pipeline was a pipeline between Russia and Germany going through the Baltic Sea that didn't have to go through Ukraine. So, where the Ukrainians could control Russian gas going to Europe, the rest of Europe from Russia. This previously, and by building this pipeline, it would be outside of Ukrainian influence and directly from Russia to Germany, and they could then distribute it to the rest of Russia as required. By blowing this up, somebody has forced the only gas pipeline. Sorry, not the only. I think there's one through Turkey nowadays as well.
But major gas supply to Europe.
Major gas supply to Europe from Russia, which is essentially the gas equivalent of Saudi Arabia for Europe. Whereas everybody gets their petrol from the Saudis, Russia provides the gas to Europe.
Sorry, I just want to give context. Why are we talking about this in a tank podcast? Because we said this before the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, that the Nord Stream pipeline was a key to the motivations of what was going on in Ukraine. We actually said that in this podcast even before the war started. So it's super important. And why I'm particularly mentioning it, and totally just get on Seymour Hersh's Substack where he's published this and have a read of what he has to say, noting he has a pedigree of getting these stories and being proven right despite being dismissed at the time as a crazy crank, and we don't like his sources and all that stuff. This is Seymour Hersh. He's been proven right every time, okay? So don't take the dismissals of him at face value, because everyone has to dismiss him. The American establishment can't just admit, oh yeah, we totally committed an act of war against Germany. The German establishment can't admit, oh, the Americans committed an act of war on us. No one can admit the truth. It's slightly terrifying. But here's the thing. I was on Radio War Nerd about 3 weeks ago. 2 weeks after that, they had Seymour Hersh as the guest talking about this. So our little tiny tank podcast is slightly in the same frame as these enormous issues. So I wanted to talk about that, and thank you for putting up with us on that.
Thank you very much, because we ramble, we wander, we go along all sorts of different places. But yes, it is a significant event, and we, as we said, we did mention that way back in 2021, I'm assuming.
Must have been.
Yeah, must have been. So we talked about it then of what's going on. And look, the pipeline actually being blown up underwater did only happen last year, so it wasn't. So it was. There are a number of factors and things happening at this stage. Now, John has just poured our first beer from the beer tube.
The French beer.
The French beer. And as Tasman said, it is indeed... Oh, I'm going the wrong way. It is the Saint Etienne beer, premium lager from...
Yeah. Also a green bottle, so if you hold it up over the green bits of the screen, just wait till it comes back to the next one. Anyway,
Because this is the one French beer I could actually get hold of.
Yes.
Because it is sold at Aldi as an Aldi product.
Weirdly, if you hold it in front of your shirt, it seems to display mostly correctly. There we go. So it's sold in Aldi, which is every thinking person's favourite supermarket in Australia.
God, yeah.
Simply because it's like, 50% cheaper than the other supermarkets. And the quality's okay.
Yeah. I still love their process of getting things in, of saying, yep, find what sells on the market, go to that supplier and say, we'll sell your product in our store, but we want you to make your own, another version only for Aldi, which it's exactly the same, but we're just going to call it something like Saint Etienne, and we're going to stock that as well. And then after 6 months later, they drop the major brand beer or whatever the actual thing is, and only sell the Aldi version of it, having convinced the supplier to provide it. It's
So Saint Etienne is one of the cheaper lagers available pretty much in Australia. And you,
$9 for a 6-pack.
You buy it at Aldi, and normally it's a really solid lager, and I would say as someone who's spent, I don't know, maybe 3 months of my life in France, I've always actually really enjoyed French beers.
It's hard to get French beers in Australia. I'm assuming there are no logistical agreements between Australian brewers and French brewers, unlike the Heinekens and the Dutch and and the Japanese companies. The interesting thing when I went to buy this was that all the American beers had in the fridge had sold out, obviously for Super Bowl.
Superb Owl. No, you get sued.
The Superb Owl, yes.
Yeah, you get sued if you say the other word.
So
God help us.
So for those who don't know,
we're sorry.
The Superb Owl is a Canberra resident bird.
That's a powerful owl.
No, Superb Owl.
Right.
Maybe I'm thinking of the Superb Booby.
Yeah. Anyway, so we call that game of football...
Superb Frigate. Superb Frigate. There was Magnificent Frigate and Superb Frigate.
We call that game of football the Superb Owl to not be sued, along with everyone else. And also just to mock people who would sue people for calling it thing what it is.
Anyway, so all the American beer was gone, but there was in various places.
So Saint Etienne is usually... quite a good lager that I would happily drink. My dad tends to keep it in the fridge for when I go around there on a Sunday night. I like it. Just as a lager, it's not the most interesting beer in the world. I just like drinking it, which is kind of important. This batch has green apple flavors. Which means they didn't bring it back up to temperature, because lager yeasts need to be brewed at low temperatures. And then you do what's called the diacetyl rest, where you bring it up to a higher temperature and the yeast eats all the diacetyl in it. This definitely still has diacetyl in it, which is a worrying lack of quality control for a major brewery that's shipping beer all over the world.
Well, hang on.
it's not the worst thing in the world.
I think it's brewed here in Australia for,
Is it? It used to be-
especially
it used to be
made for
shipped from
Aldi
us.
stores, Sergeant's Road, Minchinbury, New South Wales.
Ah, they're making it locally. Okay. Used to be it was actually shipped over from France. But yeah.
So made in France from local and imported ingredients. Best before, see Nick. Yeah,
Okay, so what are they done?
so it says made in France from local and imported ingredients, especially made for Aldi stores. Oh, so the store. Okay, the headquarters in Aldi Australia is
Okay.
Is Minchinbury. Okay, so it is brought over.
It is still it's made in France. Lagers are it's a funny thing, and we actually the chieftain raised this when we were drinking with him in Cairns, where he said actually lagers are harder to make than ales, and I was like, you are right. You know what you're talking about. Lagers are hard to make. You need to brew them over longer periods of time at lower temperatures, and then to not have the green apple taste that's in these bottles and is not usually in this beer. You need to raise the temperature for a few days, and the yeast gets
Maybe
in and eats it up.
Dixon Aldi, or where does your dad shop?
Majura Park, I think.
Oh, there you go. Maybe the Majura Park Aldi is better than the Jamison Aldi for which beer it sells.
No, I think a very big tank has not been treated quite the right way, and quality control is an important part of the brewing process.
Yes, it
but
is.
there we go. Okay, so that's Saint Etienne. Usually a good lager.
Saint
Turns out-
Etienne is where the Australian rugby team will be based at this year's Rugby World Cup, just outside of Lyon. So, there
Yes.
you go. For those who want to know about what's happening later on in the year.
Okay, Rob, what's happening in Ukraine?
Well, the battle for Bakhmut is still ongoing. The Russians are pulled back from the road to Shavazdar. Shavazdar, something like that. They consolidated their hold around Soledar. I'm going to get all these names wrong, but
Solidar's fair. Yeah.
Shavazyar, I think is the Russians are basically trying to encircle Bakhmut, but the Ukrainians are continuing to provide to support it, and they have been knocked back quite a number of things.
Both sides have taken enormous losses for a town that has no strategic value whatsoever.
But I mean, for the Russians,
It's now become the talismanic point.
It
though.
really has. It really
Yeah.
has. The big thing is the Wagner Group has no longer getting Russian prisoners to resupply their ranks, and is no longer getting support or ammunition from the regular Russian army. Supposedly, I'm taking all this off what I see on the internet, so who knows what that's like. But my mate Dennis says those are the things that are happening, and he looks into it a lot more than I do, because he's affected by a lot more than I am. So, but I watch him, and he says, yep, the Wagner Group Telegram is saying they're no longer getting ammunition from the Russian army, so they can't prosecute the attack on Bakhmut as successfully. And so
Look, I think one thing that is little understood, and I don't understand it, so I'll join the queue, is that there appears to be a civil war going on in Russia right now.
Oh yeah.
The number of people who are being falling out of windows.
Only billionaires fall out of windows, buddy.
Billionaires and now senior public servants just this week.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Yeah, it was and I mean, she looked like a woman in her 50s. Not the sort to normally throw themselves out a window. So something is going on in Russia. Wagner Group has traditionally got strong links with Putin. Hard to say in this world of shifting alliances. You could almost wonder if the whole war was actually Putin trying to show that the Russian army was ineffective, and that his own private buddies in Wagner were the way of the future for because the Russian army obviously consumes a lot of money and has its own agendas that aren't Putin's. I just don't know. No one knows outside of a very small number of people in Russia, and they're not telling, but. There's definitely a huge conflict happening internally in Russia about this whole war.
With what, 3 days to go to the anniversary of the invasion?
Yeah, well, at this time of recording, which is the Sunday, the 19th of
we didn't say it was.
February.
What did it say? What episode?
Yeah, the intro was a bit sketchy. Yeah,
I blame that on the YouTube. It was It was very distracting. It was big and long and hard and filled. Anyway, yes, other activities by the Russians, they were trying to take Volodar across a number of fields, and in the last month that they've been doing this, they've had basically lost about 30 or 40 tanks and armored personnel carriers as they're heading. So Volodar's further southwest from Bakhmut. It's down north of Melitopol.
Melitopol, yeah.
Yep. Basically, they've lost a lot of stuff down there. Basically, trying to cross some open fields, and the Ukrainian artillery is saying, "You guys are going down." And they've even taken out a helicopter, the artillery. So yeah, it's there. Not a lot happening that way. Look, there are still discussions about how many tanks are going to the Ukrainian forces, whether they're Leopard 1s, Leopard 2s, who they're coming from, when they're going to get there. The Challenger 2s, the Abrams, we haven't seen, none of those tanks have turned up yet. So for those who want to know, in February 2023, none of those tanks have turned up yet, so it's still no activity in that regard. And all the discussions about what planes might be sent across. There's some Polish Soviet planes, I think they're MiG-29s or something like that, they're going to send across, but again, nothing has actually turned up.
And anything Soviet build is useful. It appears that the talk of Western tanks is about sending new builds over so that the German and American companies get new contracts.
Being able to sell to the Saudis is not a bad thing, because they're just looking. Realistically, they're looking at the cashed up Gulf states to who can we sell what tanks to is competing. That's the competition you want to.
The world of future tank sales is the real motivator.
Yeah, it is. I mean, Ukraine is a marketing. Sorry, this is my idea right now. That Ukraine is a marketing exercise for future tank sales to Gulf states with lots of cash.
Well, I mean, not just the Gulf states. I mean, you've got countries like Australia that, will buy a bunch of
We
tanks,
should be a Gulf state with the amount of gas we produce for the rest of the world. We're the second highest fossil fuel gas producers in the world.
Yeah, we act like it too. But yeah.
But all our rather than the money going to the government and the people of Australia, it goes to certain shareholders.
Yeah, well, what's the point of wealth if it can't be given to powerful people?
Yeah, exactly.
All right, I think, are we at the end?
I can't think of anything. Oh, look, Ukraine is obviously a difficult situation. Whether or not there's suspected, the suspected Russian offensive hasn't happened. It may happen on the anniversary of the invasion, in which case next month we'll have a lot more to talk about. But realistically, there hasn't been the concentration of forces, of useful forces built up. Any sort of information about those happening around in Belarus or the breakaway republics of Donbass and Luhansk. So we're not expecting that to happen in the next month, at which point, come springtime in the Northern Hemisphere, there should be more offensive units available to the Ukrainians, and there may be more activities from their side than what's happened over the last 3 months.
The Ukrainian autumn offensive, when they've got a lot more vehicles, and the tanks are weirdly less important than the infantry fighting vehicles, I suspect. Which I will also say, an IFV is a tank. By any definition of a tank, an IFV is a tank. So let's not kid ourselves on that. So yeah. Anyway, folks, we want to thank you for listening to us.
Hanging around for such a long time.
It's been a couple of hours we've done this one. So
cheers to that.
Cheers to that, and buy your PZ38T model kits, and follow us on Twitter and Facebook, and obviously on YouTube and what have you. But we will be back in your faces in a month's time.
Next month.